The heavy cream envelope lay on the passenger seat like a declaration of war, its embossed gold letters shimmering under the streetlights. Admit to. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, the heater of her sedan humming softly against the rising howl of the wind outside. It wasn't just an invitation. It was an insult wrapped in expensive cardstock. After 12 years of building Morrison Tech from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire, she had been relegated to a guest at her own company's Christmas Gala. But Evelyn didn't cry. Tears were for people who didn't have a plan. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, her skin glowing against the midnight blue velvet of her gown, her grandmother's vintage diamond brooch pinned securely over her heart like a shield. She stepped out of the car into the biting Boston chill. The Grand Bellamy Hotel loomed above, a fortress of golden light and festive wreaths, mocking the freezing darkness of the street. A line of limousines snaked toward the entrance, discharging women in furs and men in tuxedos, who rushed inside, eager to escape the blizzard that was beginning to coat the city in white. Evelyn moved slower, her heels clicking rhythmically on the icy pavement. She wasn't focused on the warmth inside. Her eyes were fixed on the figure standing by the massive revolving doors. It was Joe, the hotel's oldest doorman. At 65, with arthritis that he tried desperately to hide, Joe was shivering in his uniform coat, which looked too thin for this weather. Most guests breezed past him, treating him as nothing more than a mechanism to open a door, invisible furniture in their night of luxury. Evelyn remembered how Richard had laughed at him just last week, calling him a useless relic. The memory made her jaw tighten. Evelyn stopped right in front of him. "Good evening, Joe," she said, her voice warm and steady, cutting through the wind. Joe blinked, surprised that anyone had stopped. "Mrs. Morrison, you shouldn't be out here. It's freezing. Let me get the door." In a moment, Evelyn interrupted gently. She pulled off her leather glove and reached into her clutch, retrieving a thick, red envelope. It wasn't showy, but it was heavy. She pressed it firmly into Joe's trembling hand. "This is for the grandchildren, Joe. I know Timmy needs those braces, and Sarah wants that art set. Make sure they have a magical Christmas." Joe looked down at the envelope, then back at Evelyn, his eyes welling up. He knew what was inside. Evelyn had done this every year, quietly, without fanfare. It was more than a tip. It was dignity. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. You're the only one who remembers. You're the first face of this hotel, Joe. You matter." Evelyn smiled, a genuine expression that didn't reach the sadness in her eyes. Joe squeezed the envelope, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper filled with genuine concern. "You need to be careful inside, Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, he's already in the ballroom. And he didn't come alone. He brought her. That girl. They're walking around acting like they own the place. Like they're royalty." The confirmation hit Evelyn harder than the cold wind, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded, appreciating the loyalty of the old man who saw everything. "Thank you, Joe. Stay warm." She turned toward the revolving doors. Through the glass, she could see the blur of the party, the champagne, the laughter, the false kingdom Richard thought he had secured. He believed that by bringing a younger, flashier woman, he could erase the history of the wife who built him. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between a title and true power. Evelyn straightens her spine, touches the diamond crown brooch on her chest, and whispers to the cold wind, "Let him play king for one more hour. He doesn't know the queen has arrived." If Evelyn's quiet strength in the face of betrayal is resonating with you, and you're finding value in these details, please leave the number 8 in the comments below to let me know you're standing with her. And if you haven't joined our community yet, I highly recommend subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this unfolding drama. Your support is exactly what helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's step inside the ballroom and continue. The massive oak doors swung open, and the hum of 200 conversations died instantly, replaced by the sharp clinking of crystal glasses being set down in shock. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of festive excess, smelling of roasted turkey, pine needles, and expensive perfume. A jazz quartet played a smooth, low rendition of Silent Night, but the atmosphere in the room was anything but peaceful. All eyes were fixed on the woman standing at the threshold. Evelyn didn't just walk in, she arrived. The midnight blue velvet of her gown seemed to absorb the room's golden light, making the diamonds at her throat and on her chest blaze even brighter. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a panther, ignoring the whispers that rippled behind her like a wake in water. From the shadows of a corner booth, Arthur Sterling watched her over the rim of his Scotch glass, his hawk-like gaze narrowing in approval. He saw what the others missed. Evelyn wasn't here to fight, she was here to rule. Evelyn didn't rush toward her husband. Instead, she stopped to greet Mrs. Vanderbilt, a senior board member, asking about her recent hip surgery. She nodded to the head waiter, Thomas, inquiring about his daughter's college acceptance. With every handshake and warm smile, she demonstrated exactly who held the true social capital in this room. Richard might have the title of CEO, but Evelyn held the people's hearts. Across the room, Richard Morrison went pale. He stood near the stage, clutching a champagne flute so hard his knuckles were white. Beside him stood Tiffany. In a sea of dark, elegant winter formal wear, Tiffany was wearing a stark white, sequin gown with a tulle skirt that looked more appropriate for a summer wedding than a corporate Christmas gala. She looked beautiful, certainly, but painfully young and jarringly out of place. "I thought the invitation was clear," Richard hissed as he marched over, dragging Tiffany by the elbow to intercept Evelyn before she could reach the main table. He forced a tight, predatory smile for the onlookers. "This is a celebration for us, Evelyn. For the future. Not for the old guard." Evelyn stopped and looked at him, her expression serene, as if he were an unruly child throwing a tantrum. Then her gaze shifted to Tiffany. She didn't sneer, she didn't frown. She simply offered a polite, pitying smile. White in winter. A bold choice for a corporate gala, dear. Very innocent. Tiffany flushed pink, suddenly conscious of how loud her dress looked compared to Evelyn's regal velvet. She tried to shrink behind Richard. Richard's jaw tightened. He wanted to exert control, to show everyone that Evelyn was no longer relevant. He snapped his fingers loudly at a passing waiter. It was Thomas. "You," Richard barked. "Get my wife a glass of ice water. She looks like she needs to cool off before she leaves." It was a deliberate public humiliation. The room held its breath. Thomas stopped. He looked at Richard, then at the water pitcher on his tray, and finally at Evelyn. Slowly, deliberately, Thomas bypassed Richard completely. He reached for a fresh bottle of the vintage Dom Perignon reserved for the top table, poured a flute, and offered it to Evelyn with a slight bow. "Your favorite vintage, Mrs. Morrison. Welcome home." Evelyn accepted the glass with a gracious nod. "Thank you, Thomas. Impeccable service, as always." The quiet defiance was deafening. Richard stood there, ignored by his own staff, holding onto a mistress who looked like she wanted to disappear. The guests nearby pretended to inspect their napkins, hiding their smirks. He had tried to treat Evelyn like an unwanted guest, and the room had just reminded him that she was the hostess. Richard's face turns red with fury, and he grabs Tiffany's hand, marching toward the stage while hissing, "Watch me end her relevance right now." The microphone feedback screeches through the hall like a dying bird, forcing every guest to turn their eyes toward the stage where Richard stood, trembling with adrenaline. The sudden noise cut through the polite murmurs, leaving a heavy, awkward silence in its wake. Beside him, Tiffany beamed, waving slightly to the crowd with the practiced enthusiasm of a beauty pageant contestant, blissfully unaware that the room wasn't staring with admiration, but with second-hand embarrassment. Richard gripped the podium, his face flushed with wine and the intoxicating rush of perceived power. He mistook the room's stunned silence for reverence. "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice booming too loud over the speakers. "Tonight isn't just about Christmas. It's about evolution. For too long, Morrison Tech has been held back by traditional thinking, by caution, by the past." He didn't look at Evelyn, but everyone else did. Evelyn stood near the front, perfectly still, sipping her champagne. She watched him not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a volatile experiment. "It is time to shed the dead weight," Richard continued, gaining momentum. "I am thrilled to announce the launch of our new Future Forward initiative. And to lead this fresh, vibrant era, I want to introduce the new face of our charitable arm, someone who represents youth, energy, and the new spirit of this company. Please welcome Tiffany." He gestured to her as if unveiling a statue. Tiffany stepped forward, giggling, and took a small bow. Richard practically crowned her the new First Lady of the Empire right there on stage. He waited for the thunderous applause. It never came. The room remained deadly silent. A few paid interns near the back started to clap, but stopped abruptly when they realized no one else was joining in. The older investors stared at their shoes or swirled their drinks, refusing to make eye contact with the stage. The board members looked at Evelyn, their expressions a mix of apology and respect. The rejection was absolute. Richard's smile faltered. The silence was suffocating. He scanned the room, desperate to find a target for his humiliation, and his eyes landed on Evelyn. She was the only one looking directly at him, her head held high, her diamond brooch catching the stage lights. Her calm infuriated him. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with venom masquerading as concern. He pointed a finger directly at her. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You look tired, darling. Maybe this new pace is too much for you. Perhaps it's time you go home and rest. Let the new generation handle the future." The audacity of this statement sucked the air out of the room. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was publicly exiling the woman who had built the very stage he was standing on. Evelyn lowered her glass slowly, preparing to speak, but she didn't need to. Before Evelyn can take a breath, the heavy thud of a cane striking the wooden floor echoes like a gunshot, and Arthur Sterling's voice booms. "Sit down, boy. You haven't finished your homework." That cane strike echoed louder than any shout, didn't it? If you are still watching and finding value in these dramatic details, please comment the number 1 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend hitting that subscribe button and turning on the bell so you don't miss the justice that is about to be served. Your support is exactly what helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's see what Arthur has to say. Arthur Sterling's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of 50 years of boardroom battles, freezing Richard in his tracks like a deer caught in headlights. The elderly investor walked slowly toward the stage, his cane clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. Richard, sweating now, tried to regain his composure. He extended a hand toward Arthur, forcing a smile. "Arthur, I didn't see you there. I was just telling everyone about the exciting news." Arthur didn't take the hand. He didn't even look at it. He walked right past Richard, took the microphone from the stand, and turned to face the room. "A company isn't built on speeches, Richard," Arthur said, his tone deceptively mild. "It's built on trust, on character. And tonight, you broke ours." "I don't know what you mean," Richard stammered, his smile twitching. "I am the CEO. I own 51% of this company. I can do whatever I please." "Actually, you don't," a calm voice cut in. Evelyn stepped out from the crowd. She wasn't holding a wine glass anymore. She was holding a sleek black legal folder. She walked up the stairs to the stage, not as a scorned wife, but as a seasoned attorney. The room was so quiet you could hear the snow hitting the windows outside. "You signed the incorporation papers 12 years ago, Richard," Evelyn said, standing next to Arthur. "But you never read the amendments I added when we went public. Specifically, the trust clause." She opened the folder and pulled out a document, the edges crisp and sharp. "Arthur, would you like to explain?" Arthur nodded, looking at Richard with profound disappointment. "You see, son, when your wife spent nights sitting by my wife's hospital bed while you were out networking on the golf course, we talked. I told her that a man who cannot honor his vows cannot be trusted with my money." Evelyn held up the document. "This is the moral integrity clause. It states that if the CEO engages in public conduct that damages the company's reputation, such as bringing a mistress to a family gala and humiliating a co-founder, the voting rights of his majority shares are immediately suspended and transferred to the board of trustees." Richard's eyes bulged. He snatched the paper from her hand, scanning the highlighted paragraphs. This isn't legal. You tricked me." "I protected the company," Evelyn corrected him, her voice steely. "I wrote it. You signed it. And the board has just voted." Your voting rights are suspended effective immediately. You are no longer the CEO, Richard. You are just a shareholder with a bad reputation. She took a step closer, her voice dropping so only he and the microphone could hear. You tried to crown a queen in my kingdom, Richard. But you forgot who built the throne. Richard stares at the paper, his hands shaking so hard the microphone feedback screeches again, while Tiffany slowly lets go of his arm and steps back, realizing the ship is sinking. The color drained from Richard's face, so fast it looked like the blood had simply decided to abandon a sinking ship, leaving him gray and ghostly under the stage lights. He looked around the room, searching desperately for an ally, for someone who would laugh and say this was all a misunderstanding. But the faces staring back at him were unreadable walls of stone. He turned to Arthur Sterling, his voice cracking. "Arthur, please. You can't let her do this. We have a history." Arthur simply turned his back, leaning heavily on his cane to speak to a waiter, as if Richard had already ceased to exist. One by one, the other board members followed suit, turning their shoulders to the stage. It was a silent, devastating vote of exile. Tiffany, realizing the ground had shifted beneath her stilettos, tried to salvage her own dignity. She let go of Richard's arm as if it were burning hot and took a hesitant step toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Morrison," she began, her voice trembling, I didn't know. He told me the divorce was finalized," he said. Evelyn raised a hand gently, stopping the girl mid-sentence. She didn't look angry, she looked tired. "You knew he was married, dear. You saw the ring tan on his finger. The rest is just details." She didn't raise her voice, but the shame that washed over Tiffany was palpable. "You bet on the wrong horse. It happens." Two burly security guards materialized at the edge of the stage. They were men Richard had ignored for years, men whose names he never bothered to learn. Now, they looked at Evelyn for instruction, waiting for the command to throw him out. Richard flinched, expecting humiliation, expecting to be dragged out by his collar. But Evelyn shook her head. "No scenes," she said softly to the head of security. "Please escort Mr. Morrison and his guest to the exit. And check the coat check." She paused, glancing at the window where the blizzard was raging. "It's snowing heavily. Ensure they have umbrellas. We aren't savages." Even in victory, she offered mercy. It was the ultimate power move. Richard stared at her, mouth agape, unable to comprehend kindness from the woman he had tried to destroy. The guards nodded respectfully and gestured toward the doors. "This way, sir." The walk from the stage to the exit felt like miles. Richard walked stiffly, stripped of his arrogance, with Tiffany trailing a few feet behind, clutching her bare arms. As the guards pushed open the grand entrance doors, a gust of freezing wind and snow swirled into the warm, golden ballroom. Richard paused at the threshold. He looked back one last time. He saw the warmth, the crystal chandeliers, the colleagues he had alienated, and in the center of it all, Evelyn, radiant in blue velvet, surrounded by friends, holding her grandmother's brooch. She didn't look back at him. She was already speaking to Arthur, rebuilding what he had broken. The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed in everyone's chest, leaving the room in a stunned, respectful silence. The silence didn't last long. It was broken not by gossip, but by the slow, rhythmic clapping of Arthur Sterling, soon joined by the entire room in a thunderous ovation. It wasn't the polite, scattered applause of a corporate obligation. It was a wave of genuine respect that rolled from the back of the ballroom to the stage. Evelyn stood there for a moment, letting it wash over her, not with pride, but with relief. She caught Arthur's eye one last time. The old man nodded, a small, proud smile touching his lips, before raising his glass in a silent toast. The message was clear. The house is clean. Evelyn didn't stay to bask in the adulation. She didn't need to hear the apologies of the people who had ignored her an hour ago. She quietly thanked the security team, squeezed Mrs. Vanderbilt's hand, and slipped out toward the lobby while the band started playing a cheerful, triumphant jazz number. By the time she reached the main entrance, the storm had passed. The blizzard that had raged when she arrived had left behind a pristine, glittering blanket of white snow, covering the city in peace. The air was crisp and clean, scrubbing away the heavy perfume and tension of the gala. Joe was waiting by her car, brushing the last of the snow off the windshield. He moved a little faster now, seemingly energized by the news that must have already traveled to the staff. When he saw her, he straightened up and opened the rear door with a flourish usually reserved for royalty. "Good evening, ma'am," Joe said, his eyes twinkling under the hotel lights. He hesitated for a second, then grinned. "Or should I say boss?" Evelyn stopped, her hand resting on the car door. She looked at the old man who had been the only friendly face in the cold earlier that night. She reached out and patted his arm gently. "Just Evelyn, Joe. Just Evelyn." She slid into the warm leather seat, the door closing with a solid, comforting thud that shut out the rest of the world. For the first time all night, she was alone. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a quiet, profound exhaustion. She reached up and unpinned the heavy diamond brooch from her dress. Holding it in her palm, she looked at the ancient stones sparkling in the dim light of the dashboard. It was heavy, like the legacy it represented. "We did it, Nana," she whispered softly to the empty car, her thumb tracing the sharp edges of the diamonds. "We kept the dignity. We didn't let them change us." She put the car in gear. The engine hummed to life, a steady, reliable sound. She wasn't waiting for a chauffeur tonight. She wanted to drive herself. As the car drove away into the silent, snowy night, Evelyn didn't look back at the hotel. She looked forward at the road ahead, finally driving her own wheel. As the snow settles over the city and the lights of the Grand Bellamy fade into the distance, Evelyn reminds us of a timeless truth often forgotten in our noisy world. True nobility isn't found in a title, a corner office, or even in the finest diamonds. It is found in the quiet dignity of how we treat others when we think no one is watching. Like a lighthouse in a storm, kindness may not always be loud, but it is the only power that can guide us home with our heads held high. If Evelyn's quiet victory warmed your heart tonight, or if you believe that character still counts for more than reputation, I invite you to join our community by subscribing below. Let's build a place where we remind each other that kindness is the only crown that never tarnishes. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.